get started tonight. Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this time to get together again this week and study. Tonight we'll be looking at plague 6 and 7, and just pray that you would bless our time as we look at these. Help us to learn something new like we usually do. In your name we pray, amen. All right, so just a reminder where we are, especially since Collins and Frenchie have missed it all. So water was turned into blood, and it was basically undrinkable and unusable for about a week. And then we had the frogs come out of the Nile, and remember they got into everything, even into the bowls that had the dough in it, and the beds, and couldn't get away from them. Then the third one was the bugs, either some kind of a lice or gnats. We're not sure based on the Hebrew word, but whatever it was, it annoyed the mess out of us. And either buzzing around our ears and eyes or biting us. And then the fourth plague was a swarm that we discussed probably had multiple things that would sting and bite us, and just were not only in the house, but also covered the ground where we were trying to walk. And certainly was quite painful. And then where we left off last time was the plague 5, where God sent a disease that wiped out our livestock, or at least whatever livestock was out in the field at the time, and probably a pretty major portion of what we had in our possession at that time. So this is just the layout of what we've been looking at. And with the first 5 plagues, we see, I changed them to blue because I think it was a little bit easier to see. Basically we have confronted, as God, we have confronted multiple gods within this Egyptian pantheon, and shown that they really don't have a whole lot of control over the areas that they're supposed to have control over. And so these, and we'll see a few more added to it tonight, that should be doing something if they had the power to do something. And the kind of the point being, and we'll get into it a little bit more next week as we wrap up with 8 and 9, the inability of this particular group of gods to actually stand up to not just God of the Hebrews, but also to Moses. Okay. All right. So if we move into the 6th plague, we're going to see here that we're wrapping up the second group of 3. Remember, we had sort of 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5, 6, and then we'll have 7, 8, 9. So tonight we're covering that second transition. And just like we saw between the second and the third, in the previous chapter, you remember we got a lot of detail about the first one, we got a lot of detail about the second one, and then the third one in our translation here only gets about 4 verses. And it doesn't talk a whole lot about the plague itself. There was another purpose for this, the way in which Moses recorded this third one. But we're going to see the same type of pattern for this transition between 5 and 6. And so we see that in chapter 9, the first few verses there, we see that the livestock have died. Remember that God had promised that none of the livestock of the Israelites will get the disease and die. And in verse 7, Pharaoh even sends a runner down there to the land of Goshen and confirms that none of the livestock of Israel died. But the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, and he did not let the people go. And then we see in verse 8, as Moses starts in on the 6th plague, that the Lord said to Moses, "Take handfuls of soot from the kiln and let Moses throw them into the air in the sight of Pharaoh." So really no visit, no discussion, no warning. There's really no interaction between Moses and Pharaoh here to actually set up this particular plague similar to what we see in Plague 3. A couple of things to notice here. Well, let's go ahead and read it because it's pretty short. So we see that he takes these handfuls of soot. Moses throws them into the air in the sight of Pharaoh. It shall become fine dust over all the land of Egypt. And as that dust moves throughout the land, it becomes boils breaking out in sores on man and beast throughout all the land of Egypt. So in 10, they took the soot from the kiln, stood before Pharaoh. Moses throws it up in the air, and it became boils breaking out and sores on man and beast. And the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boils came upon the magicians and upon all the Egyptians. But the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he did not listen to them as the Lord had spoken to Moses. Okay, so a couple of interesting things are in these few verses. It is thought that it's not a random request that God is making or a random activity that God is asking Moses to do here. Okay, so where have we seen the use of kilns before, especially as it was important to the Hebrews? These kilns that are being referenced here.
Oh, okay.
What would they probably have been used for? No, this would have been real everyday life that these Hebrews had to. They're made.
Bread.
Not bread.
The stones they were making.
The bricks.
Oh, the bricks.
Yeah, the bricks that they were making.
Yeah,
Remember?
okay,
That's
yeah.
kind of where all this started.
Yeah.
And so we don't know, because nothing's been said since that description, whether they are still under those same requirements that Pharaoh put in place. You know, he put really heavy loads of brick production on them and took away their access to the straw. They had to go and find their own. And we don't get any indication that he's relented on that they are still having to try to manage that same type of requirement that Pharaoh might have on them. Be that as it may, even if they are not, we were still under quite some duress back in those early exchanges. And so it could be that God is using this as an example to Pharaoh that you're going to cause pain to my people. Well, guess what? I'm going to use the soot from that kiln to cause pain to your people. So in this case, we've got the soot from this kiln, and he walks into, presumably, we don't get a location, so presumably probably in Pharaoh's palace, perhaps, although he could be down by the river again, we don't know. But he finds Pharaoh and just takes that handful of soot, throws it up in the air. Now, this soot doesn't drift down, kind of stays suspended. You kind of imagine what that might be like, and then begins to dissipate throughout the land of Egypt. And everywhere that it passes, man and beast breaks out of these boils. The boils here are not just, well, we know if we were going to use some sort of modern terminology, they are festering boils. Also kind of creating these lesions on the body, these sores. So these are incredibly painful. It's likely that so these kinds of festering boils would not be uncommon in this area of the world, obviously. And most of the ones that are there naturally, once you have them, they are contagious. We'll see a reason why these might have been as well. But
Sounds like monkeypox.
it could be. But bottom line is that there was no doubt in the minds of the Egyptians where these were coming from. Okay, that dust cloud that spread throughout the town, there was a causative agent that when it passed by, I had these boils all over my body. We see that it not only affected the humans, the Egyptians, it also affected their beasts. And it is likely that this is a different group than the livestock. Remember when we went through the Genesis 1 and we got the creation story, God talked about actually creating animals in kind of two groups, the livestock and the beasts. And so the beasts would probably, it's going to be the same word we've got here, very different from the livestock that was used in the previous plague, the fifth plague. And so it's likely that these are talking about a different set of animals and a different group of animals that mean something different to these Egyptians. Probably these would be their prizes or their pets, and probably individual or animals that would live within the household. Okay, and I just brought a couple of slides here to show some of this. So obviously dogs would have been pretty important to the Egyptians. We've got, in fact, some of the breeds that we still have today can trace their lineage back to the ancient Egyptians. Here's one that was important enough that it actually got mummified, and I won't try to pronounce that name, but was found with its own tomb, and near its human owners probably. Obviously, the Egyptians felt very highly about cats, and we know that they probably had some of the other great cats at their disposal as well, leopards and cheetahs and lions. And probably the best place that I found where we can kind of see it, there are multiple panels like this in the Pharaoh's tombs. And what this indicates is different people groups, whether they were subjected to Egypt or not, they would still come before Pharaoh and provide tribute. So these were the gifts that they were bringing to Pharaoh, and you can see several animals in there. So we've got some of the livestock, obviously, of course, but here would be the probably some leopards or lions there, some kind of gazelles. Put my glasses on. Cheetahs there, probably. There's an ostrich, monkeys, and there would be the greyhounds in the back. Then here'd be another group. So we got giraffe, monkey again. That's a baby elephant. And not really sure what that is there. Horses. Yeah, so a lot of those wild animals, they would have been sort of these. You would bring these as tribute. They would bring these as, well, they probably weren't necessarily in Egypt even then, but the other African nations would bring them to Pharaoh as the dominant civilization in the area, and these would be the tributes to Pharaoh, and then we would keep them in gardens, and they would be our prized possessions. In some of them, so that's how we know they're not the same as the when we see Egyptians drawn, for sure. So they would keep these beasts and probably have them in their homes, and it's probably animals like this that we're talking about here. They would have been covered in boils and have these sores and would also be suffering in that way. In reference to the boils, in Leviticus, we actually see God telling the Israelites, once they have made it to Mount Sinai, and he's giving them the law, but in the law, there are instructions on what to do when you actually get these normally. It says, when someone has a boil on their skin and it heals in the place where the boil was, a white swelling or reddish white spot appears, they must present themselves to the priest. The priest is to examine it. If it appears to be more than skin deep, then the hair in it has turned white, then the priest shall pronounce that person unclean. It is a defiling skin disease that has broken out where the boil was. So that means it's infectious. There's something there that will spread if it breaks open. If when the priest examines it, there is no white hair and it does not appear to be skin deep, or it appears to just be skin deep, and it has faded, then the priest will isolate them for 7 days before they can come back into the group. So don't tell me that quarantining is not in scripture, because right here, God very clearly shows us that isolating when you're sick is a good idea. The person who is unclean would have to live outside of camp until such a time as they could be declared clean again. And then to become clean again, remember, you had to come and make sacrifices even. And so we probably are thinking about boils in this first group that these Egyptians are dealing with. Some that are deep below the skin or going more than skin deep, festering, and would have that defiling skin disease associated with it. Now, it doesn't say that, but probably the fact that it's described as boils breaking out in sores would suggest that it's probably more the first case than the second. And the only other place we see these mentioned, same word and everything, would be in Job. And remember, he had the boils that would broke out into sores. And by chapter 2, what was he wishing for? Death. So in his mind, death was better than what he was experiencing at that time. And so I think it's pretty safe to say that the Egyptians here are pretty miserable with what's going on and the fact that they have these boils on them. Now, as we saw in the third plague, you remember we had the sort of the shorter, like I mentioned a minute ago, the shorter description for plague 3. And we said that Moses made this one shorter because there was a different piece of the story he wanted us to focus on. So if we go back to chapter 8 and look at the gnats, verse 17, Aaron stretches out his hand with the staff, strikes the dust of the earth, and there were gnats on man and beast, or lice, it could be in your translation there. All the dust of the earth became gnats in all the land of Egypt. And that's it. That's all the description we get for the gnats. But the important part of the story is verse 18. The magicians tried by their secret arts to produce gnats, but they could not do so. So remember, we talked about how they fully believe they could do it, and they don't understand why they can't. And so their explanation to Pharaoh is, this is the finger of God. And that's not necessarily the Hebrew God, but this is obviously not one of our gods, because if it was one of our gods, we'd be able to do what we're expect to do and have been able to do before. And so the third plague was kind of that first point where the magicians got embarrassed and were not able to duplicate what Moses and Aaron had been doing. And so I don't think it's an accident that we see in plague 6 that who shows up again? Well, actually, they can't show up because of the boils. We see that just like in the third plague, the 6th plague, the ending of this description brings those magicians back in. Verse 11, the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boils had come upon the magicians and upon all the Egyptians. And so we have the magicians in 3 forced to admit that they can't do what Moses and Aaron did. And here we see that the boils are so bad that either they had to leave or they might not have even been able to show up. So the chances are pretty good that the magicians have been there for every exchange so far, either down by the river or in the palace. Whenever they would show up, Pharaoh would probably call them. And we see here that they were not able to stand before Moses because of the boils that are there. So they either fled or had to stay home just because of the physical discomfort that they were under. And you'll notice probably more important, well, we'll notice as we go along, this is the last time that we see the word magician in the Bible, meaning that these guys aren't mentioned again. And so this is where they are basically forced out of the story. God uses these boils to, now I'm going to isolate Pharaoh. His religious guys and his magicians are no longer there for him. And I have removed them from this equation. They are no longer there to oppose Moses. And we see that the response as well, this is the first time that we've seen the phrase, the Lord is the one who hardened Pharaoh's heart. And he did not listen, just as the Lord had spoken to Moses. Okay? All right, so the magicians, I think, are the important piece here. I don't think that we should lose sight of that, that's the main point that Moses is trying to make as he writes this one up. All right, a couple of new gods and goddesses here. There's actually one that's not actually on that pedigree. So probably the main one is a goddess named Sekhmet, who has a lioness head. And if we go back up, she's this gal right here. Okay, so we saw Apis and Ptah get taken down by the livestock. Remember, he's got the bull, kind of the bull aspect to him. And Sekhmet would be his wife. And so she is depicted by a lioness, which the creatures being affected by boils also tracks with that. So she is known as the Lady of Life. Her name is actually derived from the Egyptian word for power and might. She was supposed to be able to avert plagues and was supposed to be able to cure disease. She was the patron goddess for healers and magicians and physicians and priests, or basically in those days. But we kind of see it in Jesus' day too, you know, when somebody gets healed, they have to go to the priest and present themselves, or when you had a disease, you call the priest in to pray over you in an effort to heal, and the priest would have ways that they would deal with things. Her priests are supposed to have been some of the most skilled in healing things because of just the nature of the things they studied and the lore they passed on. And so she would have been probably the main target for this particular disease-based or infection-based plague. Kind of downstream from her is another interesting one. This one's Imhotep, and he's the god of wisdom and healing. He's actually credited as the father of medicine. He is one of the few Egyptian real people that actually got deified about 1,000 years after his death. So we have a little bit of information about him when he lived, but we have more information in the stories that developed over him as he kind of became a god. He was a non-royal. He was, based on some of the information we have from Pharaoh Dozier's tomb, he was the chancellor. He was also the high priest of Ra, who we haven't seen come into it yet. Remember, he's the king of the gods. He's supposed to have existed about 2600 BC. Moses has probably lived about 1,000 years later, 12 to 1300 BC. And he's credited with having built this tomb, which is in the sort of the Thebes area, which is kind of the southern Egypt, not in the Delta area. I don't think I have a map in here anymore, but it's just above where the Delta would be. And they've done a lot of excavation in this temple and have yet to find a tomb. So they don't seem to have found his actual room, but the consensus is that this is his actual tomb. Now, what's interesting about this guy is that you'll probably notice a couple of similarities to a story that would have happened long before Moses that had some of the same characteristics with it, who was a chancellor and who would have been very wise, and who might not actually have a tomb in Egypt, even though there's a memorial and a monument built to him.
He was before Moses.
Mhm. So there are some scholars that, and it's not, obviously we have no proof of it, but there are some scholars that believe that this might be the Egyptian version of Joseph. And that when Joseph's life as chancellor, as kind of the premier of Egypt, that he would have built, remember all the places for storing grain, chances are something like this could have happened as well. Again, nothing to actually draw that connection other than some similarities in their two stories. And the fact that that wisdom, and we don't see it mentioned often, but I don't think it would be out of the realm of possibility to be thinking that Joseph had a reputation for praying over people, and they knew his God could heal things that other gods could not. But anyway, it's an interesting connection that some scholars are tracking, and I don't know if we'll ever find out if the stuff in Egyptian literature for Imhotep would actually be related to Joseph or not. But he would definitely be one in that area that would be responsible for healing. And so the fact that they're finding no healing would be a hit against him. And then a couple that we looked at last week, remember, Circe was more goddess of protection from stinging things. Remember her scorpion on top. But this would be related to her aspect as healing as well. And then another one that we've seen would be Isis. We talked a little bit more about her in relation to the Nile, because remember it's her tears at the death of her husband that causes the Nile to flood. But she also is known as the goddess of fertility and healing. And we don't know if this is Osiris or her son Horus, kind of before he takes on that hawk head, but you can see she's putting the life into him. So that ability to give life.
Is that what that symbol is?
Mm-hmm.
Because you see that.
You see that a lot. It's the Ankh. Yeah.
It's what?
Ankh, A-N-K-H.
Okay.
And it is the symbol for life.
That's in almost every picture.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we see Sekhmet added to it, and a couple of the others that we had already seen before. All right. As we come out of Plague 6, we see again this reference to God hardening Pharaoh's heart. This is kind of the first time where God does the hardening. And so this is a indication, and we talked about this a little bit earlier before we got into the plagues, that remember Pharaoh did not do anything, or was not forced to do anything that he wasn't already trying to do. And so the chances are pretty good that Pharaoh had his chance to respond in plagues 1 through 5. He was given multiple chances to do the right thing, and he did not. So it's possible, again, we'll never know because it didn't happen, but it's possible that had he responded differently by the 5th plague, that plague 6 through 10 might not have happened. Because remember, God never said, I'm going to send 10 plagues. What did he say? He said, I'm going to do wonders in Egypt. And by the time I'm done, Pharaoh's going to send you out, or you're going to be able to come out. So I'm going to deliver you. And so it's possibility that we could have gotten out after, or any of these times. Of course, Pharaoh's told them they could go a couple of times and lied about it. But we see here a clear transition in the way that God now is interacting with Pharaoh, where the he's hardened his heart these first 5 times. And we'll see he's going to still have a hard heart as we go along. But from here on out, 6 through 10 are going to happen. So the game has changed for Pharaoh. And we see that as we move on into the next 4 plagues, starting with 7. All right, we don't know when or if the boils go away, or whether they just had to heal. So we don't know exactly how much time might have passed between the boils themselves and what now begins to unfold in verse 13 with the coming of the 7th plague. The 7th plague is going to begin this last group of 3, 7, 8, 9. And we see that this is going to be a significant increase in intensity over 4 through 6, which were a significant increase in damage from 1 through 3. All right, so it's interesting here we get actually a very important interaction between Moses and Pharaoh as we set this one up. And it should become very clear to Pharaoh that the game has changed, really. So verse 13, we see that Lord says to Moses, rise up early in the morning, present yourself before Pharaoh and say to him, thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, you will let my people go that they may serve me. For this time, I'm going to send all my plagues on you yourself and on your servants and on your people, and you are going to know that there is none like me in all the earth. For by now, I could have put out my hand and struck you and your people with pestilence, and you would have been cut off from the earth. But for this purpose, I have raised you up to show you my power so that my name may be proclaimed in all the earth. Look, you are still exalting yourself against my people and will not let them go. So about this time tomorrow, so early morning, I am going to cause a very heavy hail to fall, such as has never been seen in Egypt from the day it was founded until now. So therefore send and get your livestock and all that you have in the field into safe shelter. For every man and beast that is in the field that is not brought home will die when the hail falls on them. Whoever feared the Lord, or the word of the Lord among the servants of Pharaoh, hurried the slaves and livestock into the houses. But whoever did not pay attention to the word of the Lord left his slaves and his livestock in the field. So what we see God saying is plagues 1 through 6, I've actually been being nice. I've been holding back. If you want to know the truth, what do you think it means when it says, I could have cut you off from the earth? If I had wanted to, I could have killed every one of them, just like I killed the frogs when you asked me to. And my people could have walked free. But I wanted you to know that I was God. I was giving you a chance to understand that I was God. And this is now what your purpose is, okay? So you better cinch your belt up because things are about to get bad. I'm about to show you that I am much more powerful than you could ever imagine. You are still exalting yourself against my people, and I'm about to bring you down. When I'm done, everybody around the world, not just in Egypt, but everybody around the world. And what are we doing actually here tonight? We are talking about how powerful and how great is the name of the Lord. We are proclaiming his name in all the earth. So we get this prediction that this hailstorm is coming. We do see that there are quite a few that have gotten it by now. God's obviously got some attention of some people. Some of the smarter folks in Egypt have begun to realize that this is not a battle we can win. This is a God that is real, is able to touch this world in ways that we've never really seen before. And having seen what we've seen with these first 6, and again, we might still have the marks on our bodies to remind us, everything I own is coming inside before tomorrow. Okay, so we get these warnings of a hurricane coming. What do we spend a few days doing? Boarding up the windows, getting the plants inside, making sure that we've got areas for that our cars are safe, move it so where the tree doesn't fall on it. As much as we can do to prepare, we do it because we've got the warning. So there were those who took that warning and paid attention, but there were those like Pharaoh who still didn't think much of it. And we see that they did not listen and left their slaves and livestock in the field. So the next morning, verse 22, the Lord says to Moses, stretch out your hand towards heaven. Actually, one thing I forgot to point out in the boils and in the hail here, notice that Aaron's kind of in the background now. This is now mano a mano, Pharaoh and Moses. And remember, God told Moses at the beginning, you are going to be the hand of God before Pharaoh by the time this is all over. And so stretch out your hand toward heaven so there may be hail. So no staff needed here. Well, yeah, in 23, Moses stretches out his staff toward heaven. And the Lord sent thunder and hail and fire ran down to the earth. So we're talking about the lightning there. That is basically just crackling across the sky, striking all kinds of places. Lord rained hail upon the land of Egypt. There was hail and fire flashing continually in the midst of the hail, very heavy hail, such as had never been seen in all the land of Egypt since it had become a nation. And remember, Egypt's one of those countries who started recording history a lot earlier than the rest of us. The hail struck down everything that was in the field in all the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And the hail struck down every plant of the field and broke every tree of the field. Only in the land of Goshen, where the people of Israel were, there was no hail. So they might have gotten the rainstorm, but the hail and the continuous lightning and striking everything, probably that lightning starting fires. So homes are burning, trees are on fire. And we see that there is a very clear supernatural division between the land of the Egyptians and the land of the Hebrews, where they were not in danger from this hail and this lightning. So we've got this powerful storm that comes along and causes massive destruction. And so basically any animals that had survived the disease probably were caught up in this, especially if they were out in the field. We see the servants probably were killed. Anybody who was caught out in it was probably killed because of the nature of this hailstorm. And I think it's pretty important, the verse 24, where it says that the hail and the fire was basically continuous. So we don't know how long it went on, but it was abnormally long. Okay. And all of us have been holed up waiting for a hurricane to pass over, and it takes forever. And this is actually much worse than hurricane conditions, if you can imagine it. And we've got the basically you're just and you know that feeling where you just need that relief that I need it to stop. It's kind of the sound is getting in my head and I'm anxious and I know people are dying. You probably hear the screaming and it just does not stop. Then 27, we see Pharaoh calls Moses. I just thought about, I've never really thought about this, but it just strikes me that Moses and Aaron were probably, I don't know if they went back to land of Goshen or maybe they were hanging out in the safe area of the palace. But what if they had gone back to Goshen? And Pharaoh calls them back to the palace, and you see these two dudes walking along, and the hail just doesn't hit them, and the lightning fired all around them, but they walk safely right to the palace.
What a picture.
And he says, it's interesting his response here. This time I have sinned.
Yeah.
Okay. So the previous times, I will not admit that I had done wrong, but this time I have sinned. The Lord is right. I and my people are in the wrong. So again, it's not him, it's he and his people. Now, if he's talking about the religious leaders and these dummies that didn't listen and get their folks to safety, then they could be part of that group. 20, it says, plead with the Lord, for there has been enough of God's thunder and hail. I will let you go, and you shall stay no longer. And this is the first time we see that. This is the first time we see that he places no stipulation on the leaving. So remember, he said, you can't leave the country. And then he said, okay, you can go out, but you can't go too far. Only like one day. And Moses keeps reiterating, no, God told us we got to go 3 days out, and we're not going to negotiate on that particular aspect of this. He says, I will let you go and you shall stay no longer. Moses said to him, as soon as I have gone back out of the city. So it's possible, like I said, that he was hanging out there in the palace, just waiting for this conversation to take place. When I go out of the city, I will stretch out my hands to the Lord. The thunder will cease, and there will be no more hail, so that you may know that the earth belongs to the Lord. So he's going to shut it off that way. But you know what? As for you and your servants, I know that you still don't fear the Lord yet. And we see a parenthesis here that the flax and the barley had been struck down, for it was ready to be harvested. Well, actually, it was getting ready to grow or bud for the harvest. But the wheat and the emmer, two other grains, were not struck down because they had not grown up yet. Okay. So basically, we've destroyed 2 crops, but the other 2 crops survived just because they weren't far enough along to have been destroyed. It's odd that this would be included here, that Moses would mention it, and there are some who think that its inclusion here is to sort of show that on Pharaoh's mind, and especially this is supposed to be an example of you do not fear the Lord yet. So there's chances are that he's taking some comfort in the fact that only half of his crops are gone. Now, does that mean that God's not all powerful? I don't know what he's thinking. I mean, obviously he's made some decisions we don't understand, but the point being that there must be something important about the wheat and the emmer that Pharaoh's thinking about and is going to keep him from fearing the Lord like he should. Moses goes out of the city from Pharaoh, stretches out his hands to the Lord, and the thunder and the hail ceased, and the rain no longer poured upon the earth. When Pharaoh saw that the rain and the hail and the thunder had ceased, he sinned yet again and hardened his heart, and he and his servants. So the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, so that's God doing it. And he did not let people of Israel go, just as the Lord had spoken through. And we see that borne out in 10:1. The Lord said to Moses, go into Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart. So even this one is sort of Pharaoh initiates, but it's God hardening his heart here in the 7th as well. Because like I said, you've had your chance now. We're going to play this out, and you're going to see my power like you've never seen it before. Okay. All right. Some Egyptian gods here. Several that we've seen before. So we talked about Geb the Dust earlier with the gnats. So his counterpart, Newt, is the sky goddess. Actually, she's personification of the heavens. So notice that this is very specific in the fact that Moses stretches out his staff towards heaven, and the damage is done at the heaven level. Okay, so that would have been a very specific realm to the Egyptians and would have been very much her domain. Okay, so the strike was at heaven. We see Shu, who is actually the father of those two, Nut and Geb, and he is the god of light and air and wind. So he will basically kind of everything, the space that we live in. Their mom is Tefnut, so she's Shu's wife. She's the goddess of rain and moisture. Now, most of you astute viewers will notice that she looks a lot like Sekhmet with the lioness head. And the only way to tell the difference is Sekhmet's got rounded ears and Tefnut's got pointy ears. But even their head ornament is the same, with kind of the cobra going over the sun. So she would have been very much a target as the goddess of rain and moisture in the air, as Shu's wife. And then a few others that we've seen before. This is Osiris. Well, there would be Tefnut and Shu. So here's Osiris. And he was implicated here because remember we told his story a couple of weeks ago. And he was murdered by his brother because as king of the gods, his brother wanted the throne, kills him, and then he and his son begin to vie for the throne. Well, before he was killed, so remember last week we actually saw the depiction of the afterlife, and we see him kind of wrapped up as a mummy with the white. You kind of see that here as well. But over here, he's not dressed in white. Before he was killed, he was the god of agriculture. And he continued to be that even after he was killed. So he became king of the dead, but he also was still king of agriculture or crops and harvests and things like that. And that seems a little bit weird, but if you think about it, this crop cycle of last year's crop dies. Now, even Jesus talks about it. Last year's crop dies, goes into the ground, and then next year it grows back up, this rebirth. So this death, rebirth of this crop cycle certainly does match with this idea of him being God of the dead and being able to bring life through that. And so remember what we were looking at last week was when people came to that scale, and if their heart was lighter than the feather, then they got to go into eternal bliss with him. And the other gods were, if your heart was heavy, you were sent off to eternal torment. Of course, Isis, who is one of his wives, but his wife, and you can don't think either one of these are Isis. This would be Mot with her feather, but Isis would have been his wife, and remember hers were the tears that caused that flooding, so she would be part of that equation as well. And the last one that I would associate here, and probably a target, is probably one of the more popular gods, and that's Horus, who is Osiris' son. And he would be the husband of the wife we talked about last week, Hathor, the cow goddess. The two of them together were pretty popular as god and goddess. And in this case, he's the god of weather and god of the sky. And he later becomes a god of war as he and his uncle start to fight for that throne. But we definitely see his role in weather and the sky being a target. So several new ones to add to our list here. We got Horus and Now we've wiped out kind of the central core of that family for sure.
These aren't real
What do you mean? They're not,
these gods.
these guys are not real people. They probably didn't represent real people. Imhotep would
When
be
you
a,
talk about that they fight, they kill each other, how does that happen? I mean, how does?
this is the mythology.
Okay, so there's stories. that
There's
were passed
stories that
along.
the Egyptians believed, and this is how they describe the world around them. So
So when
in
these-
pre-scientific
when they call
cultures-
upon these gods, is that sort of like us praying, or how did they, you know?
some of it we praying, but a lot of it was incantation and
Just talking to them and saying,
no, ritualistic. If I do certain things. So we're going to see that same mentality as we get into Canaan.
right,
And in order to get good crops, we've got to sacrifice our children, or we've got to send out a young woman.
there are
We've got
things
to,
that they have
yeah.
to do to satisfy these gods.
Or in order to get blessings, we will go and visit the prostitutes at the temple. We will go and share a meal. So there are, it's very much a religion that's built into and it's the system by which we understand the world. So it's hard for us to picture because we kind of describe our world in very different ways. Ours is more descriptive, structural. Remember, we were talking about that at the Genesis talk, is that these guys see things more in level of function. And notice that's what God's hitting, is he's not attacking the structure of their realms. He's attacking the function, their functions, and being able to send rain, protect the crops, and do the things that the people believe that they should be able to do. And God is showing that they have no ability to do those things.
The fact that they couldn't do them doesn't make somebody cast aside, or do they quit worshiping these gods then? Because
I think that is the case, because we do see that there are some that are getting it now. And as we talked about last week, remember when we finally do leave Egypt, it's not just going to be Hebrews. There's going to be a multitude, a mixed multitude of other cultures. So there's going to be other slave races that are probably, yeah, I'm tracking along with these guys. I want this God to be my God and going to take care of me. And there were Egyptians that, I'm not staying here. This place is a swamp now. I'm getting out of here and I'm going with them. So there were specific instructions within the law of how these folks were supposed to be integrated into that nation. So I do think that there are some folks that are getting it and understanding that God is real and probably getting him. Yeah. I think what's also interesting here is, where did you hear some of the same imagery recently? Yeah. Or hear somebody talk about it, right? When Jim's talking about these seals and trumpets, what is getting hit? The same aspects of creation that, well, we as moderns don't really consider them as having been deified, but we do. I mean, they're very important to us.
Yeah.
And they're very important for as he described it yesterday, just imagining these things. And but I think this also helps us, and this is what I think Jim's trying to do, and doing a good job of it, is getting us to understand that, as I think he said it yesterday a couple of times, don't get too caught up in trying to figure out what is going on here, because this is John, a contemporary of Jesus when he was here, watching some things that he's only got certain vocabulary that he can use to describe it. So we don't know that it's an asteroid like Jim said, but John describing a mountain coming out of the sky and falling into the ocean sure does match that. Once we had telescopes and we could look out there and see these things float around, that would be certainly a option for that. That last one we was talking about yesterday, the star, is probably similar to the 10th plague here, where in the 10th plague, it's not going to be a natural phenomenon. What's it going to be? The angel of death, the destroyer, is going to come and visit every house. And so when it said the star wormwood came down and poisoned the rivers, that's probably talking about some angel that had destructive abilities, sort of like those 4 riders that were sent as well. But just like we see here, where fire runs down on the earth continually, well, we might be thinking nuclear explosions and things like that. But basically, what we're talking about here is lightning. Yeah, I mean, violent lightning that has never been seen before. But Moses is trying to describe it with his experience so that we can understand it. John's trying to explain what he's seeing and things that he's never seen before. None of us have ever seen before necessarily. And he's got certain sets of words he can use. So again, we can't get too caught up in it as to what might that be, what might that be. I think what is important for me, because we're trying to figure it out because we want to know when certain things are going to happen. But Scripture, if it's clear about one thing about the end times, is that what's true.
We're not going to be here.
None of us are going to know. So we have no idea what's leading up to it. And
I think we're getting a taste of things.
well, I think that's what's interesting about Revelation is, and I think it's true here too. Notice how all of these things are not odd in and of themselves.
Right.
What's odd about them is the intensity and how rapid they come on and last. And I think that's the truth. And so Christians have been suffering since Jesus' time at different places in the world and before. Yeah. So I don't think there's anything different about the martyrs during the tribulation than the martyrs that are here in our day. And so the intensity of that tribulation, though, is there's so much going on in that short period of time that it just becomes very evident that God's hand is at work. And so I think that in our days, all of us have kind of experienced parts of what are going to be part of the tribulation. And that's why, as some scholars, as they kind of go through it, where they'll say, Emperor Nero was the Antichrist, because he fits a lot of the descriptions. Well, that was 70 years after Jesus, and the temple was destroyed, and Revelation's already happened, it's done. Well, we don't think that's the case, but it was important for that group of Christians to get that encouragement out of Revelation that if I pursue and because what does it say? As we were going through those churches, at the very end of every church description, what does it say? So we started with Church of Ephesus in chapter 2. And it says, to the one who conquers, you will not be hurt by the second death. Pergamum came next. And we saw that sort of in verse 17, to the one who conquers, I will give some of the hidden manna. Very clear reference back to where we're going to be. Thyatira. Verse 26, to the one who conquers and who keeps my works until the end, to him I will give authority over the nations. Sardis, to the one who conquers, they will be clothed in white garments, and I will never blot their name out of the book of life. I will confess their name before my Father and before his angels. Philadelphia, To the one who conquers, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. Never shall he go out of it, and I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which comes down from my God out of heaven, and my own new name. It's a lot. Laodicea, we actually see that they do not get dressed in white or don't currently have any white garments, and he says they need them. It says, to the one who conquers, I will grant to him to sit with me on the throne, and as I also conquered and sat down with my Father. And then we go straight into that throne of heaven. So the encouragement here is what? When we find ourselves in those situations, our own sort of microcosm of tribulation, we have to have ears to hear and eyes to see, and we want to conquer.
We're overcomers.
We have to be overcomers. So that means, this is what we've been talking about. Being a Christian is not passive. It is something we've got to do every day, all day. You've got to persevere. So if you're trying to do it passively, you're not doing it right, and you might not be doing it at all. And so that's the encouragement here. And of course, that was the encouragement that the author of Hebrew was trying to get to as well, like get together and encourage each other so nobody falls away. Be careful lest you drift. Be careful lest you get led astray. And you know what? You still need milk. You should be on to the good stuff by now because you're mature enough to be there, but you're not. And I can't even tell you the good stuff. So this maturing, and I think it's really what Jim was trying to accomplish last year as he was talking about what it meant to be a mature Christian, was develop some of those characteristics that help us stay engaged, stay connected, all things that kind of came out in these churches. First love, be warm or cold, meaning being useful, don't be useless. Don't get led astray by the false teachers. You hold fast to my name, also an active thing. You can't hold fast to something if you're not paying attention. So I think that's the same message that the Israelites are getting right now, and I think the Egyptians are getting it, and I think some of those other cultures, there are going to be some of these folks there as well that probably travel with them. Well, they will, yes. And initially, I'm just taking it for the gold and the riches, but we'll see. But when all we're eating is manna and we've been out in the wilderness, and I understand that. I don't like to camp, or I like creature comforts and lots of them. So.
All their stuff. All their stuff.
But I think we'll see even more connection next week, because what's left? Locusts and then darkness. And I was thinking about that when Jim said that there was the silence for half an hour. Well, this darkness is going to last a lot longer than that.
Laughing about that. How John Rose half an hour.
Yes, so I was thinking about that too. Was he watching a candle burn down, or
What do you want to show them?
what was he? How did he know?
Smartwatch.
It's estimated. Oh, that's interesting.
And it may just be his perception though,
When the
where
electricity goes off,
he thought it was
like,
yeah, it's true.
because there's no buzz, there's
Mhm.
no hum.
None of that noise.
The electricity, yeah,
Yep.
it just gets, that time we had that ice storm in Memphis, and all you could hear were the trees popping and cracking and breaking.
Right.
But it was no electricity.
We had that in 1973.
Ours was.
Well, we didn't have any power for 10 days after Hurricane
Yeah.
Matthew.
Yeah, that,
And then
this went 2 weeks.
Wow.
but that's exactly right. But it may just be John's perceptions. It might not be 30 minutes. It might be like
Well, we're
that
gonna
same
trust the
30
Lord.
minutes that
I'm gonna say the Bible's literal.
I've been waiting. I've been waiting for 30 minutes. Man, it's been 4 minutes. But it sure did seem like 30 minutes that I had to wait. So it says about 30 minutes. So it's give or take an hour. Whatever it was, is, I mean, just like,
Need to record.
oh, that was pretty genius yesterday is Jim starts a sentence and stops. I almost said something. Are you okay? I'm checking the thing, see if his volume's up, but he doesn't look like he's talking. And I was like,
It got your attention.
he lost his notes. 'Cause
That's what I thought.
There was,
He
well, a
was
couple of
trying to
Sundays
find
ago,
where it was.
Yeah, first I thought, wait, and I said.
He probably don't want me
I was
telling
looking
you
at
this,
the
but there
Bible
was
for
a
that.
Sunday, a couple of Sundays ago, where he pulls his iPad up and his notes aren't there. So he had to kind of ad lib it for that Sunday, and you probably don't know whichever one it was, because that's how good he prepares. But I figured it'd happen again. Do I need to bring his notes? I can go print them in the back. You were uncomfortable, weren't you? Yes, I was.
This is what high power.
Yes, at least it would happen.
I think the children have been doing something about it. Even 5 minutes.
We've been offering him donuts. So, all right, let's pray and head out. Thank you, Jesus, for this day. Thank you for this time to study, like we said. And thank you for the opportunity to learn quite a bit more about these 2 plagues, 6 and 7. Just the things that you put in here for us to see and understand, really put ourselves into the places of the Egyptians, to Pharaoh, to Moses, to the Israelites, all of them. You just allow us to get a kind of a full picture of what it meant to all of them, without maybe some of the details that we would like to have. But just pray that we would learn from the lessons that you taught there, that we would learn to trust you, learn to know that you are God, and that that this earth is yours. And while we perceive this earth a little bit differently than they did, it still belongs to you, and it's still the mechanism you use to interact with us. Just pray that you would help us this week to be able to look for those opportunities that you present us with, and ask us to get involved in your work, and pray that we would be faithful to do that. In your name I pray, amen.
Thank you, Vernon.
Sure.
Like,